6 products, 6 approvals by experts, 6 graveyards that nobody talks about on the anniversary. I am Blackwell. I keep the files that other people throw away. The internal memos, the suppressed reports, the letters that were supposed to be shredded on a Friday afternoon in some corporate office in New Jersey or Basel or Dearborn. And I can tell you, with the paperwork in front of me, that every single product I am about to describe tonight was known to be dangerous before it was pulled. Known by the chemist, known by the CEO, known by the regulator, and the regulator still signed. The CEO still sold. The chemist still collected his royalty check. 6 names. Keep count. Because at the end of this, I want you to understand that the 7th product on this list is not in a museum. It is in your medicine cabinet, or your garage, or your kitchen, or your child's bedroom. Right now. Let us begin. Heinrich Muchter was a chemist with a problem. The problem was that he had worked for the wrong side during the war. In the early 1940s, Muchter had been stationed in occupied Poland, assigned to the Institute of Typhus Research in Krakow, where Jewish prisoners were used as test subjects for vaccines. When Germany collapsed, Muchter slipped the net. He did not go to trial. He did not write a memoir. He went back to work. By 1957, Heinrich Muchter was the head of research at Chemie Grunenthal, a small pharmaceutical company in Stolberg in the Rhineland. Grunenthal was ambitious. Grunenthal wanted a blockbuster. And Muchter had been playing with a compound that he could not quite explain. The compound was called Thalidomide. Under the brand name Contergan in Germany, it was marketed as a sedative so gentle that a pregnant woman could take it for morning sickness and sleep like a child. The advertising was specific. Safer than aspirin. Safer than a glass of warm milk. No side effects. Available over the counter in West Germany. No prescription required. By 1960, Thalidomide was being sold in 46 countries under 37 different brand names. Distaval in the United Kingdom. Sofenon in Belgium, Neurosidine in Sweden. The drug was everywhere. A housewife in Liverpool could walk into a chemist and leave with a bottle in under a minute. Here is what Heinrich Muchter did not do. He did not test the drug on pregnant animals. Not rabbits, not mice, not rats. He tested it on adults and concluded that because the sedative effect was mild in adults, it must be safe for everyone. This was the entire safety dossier, a handful of animal studies on non-pregnant subjects, and a conclusion that amounted to a shrug. In Liverpool, a man named William McBride, a young obstetrician, began noticing something strange in his delivery room in 1961. Babies were being born without arms, or without legs, or with hands attached directly to the shoulders, like tiny flippers. The medical term is phocomelia, from the Greek for seal limb. McBride had delivered thousands of babies. He had seen phocomelia perhaps twice in his entire career, and now he was seeing it 3 times in a single week. Around the same time, in Hamburg, a pediatrician named Widukind Lenz was looking at the same pattern. He was getting calls from colleagues all over West Germany. Phocomelia cases that used to appear once in 100,000 births were now appearing in clusters, entire maternity wards full of them. Lenz sat down and started phoning the mothers. He asked them a single question. What did you take during pregnancy? The answer came back again and again. Contergan. 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 On November 15, 1961, Widukind Lenz phoned Chemie Grunenthal and told them, in so many words, that their blockbuster drug was producing deformed children on an industrial scale. Grunenthal's response is in the record. They threatened Lenz with a lawsuit. They accused him of being emotional. They demanded more proof. They stalled for 12 days while Muchter's drug continued to be sold in every pharmacy in the country. On November 27, 1961, Grunenthal finally pulled Contergan from the German market. 2 days later, the British distributor followed. By the time the last bottle was off the last shelf, approximately 10,000 babies had been born with thalidomide-induced deformities across the 46 countries where the drug had been licensed. Roughly 40% of them died in the first year of life. The survivors, some of whom are still alive as I record this, spent their lives adapting to bodies that pharmaceutical chemistry had rewritten while they were still in the womb. Now, the United States. This is the part that gets taught in every pharmacology class in the world. In 1960, a Canadian-born physician named Frances Kelsey had recently joined the United States Food and Drug Administration in Washington. She was 46 years old. She had a medical degree and a PhD in pharmacology. She had been on the job for 1 month when the application for thalidomide landed on her desk. The American distributor was a company called Richardson Merrill, and they had a name ready: Kevidon. They wanted the drug on American shelves by Christmas. Kelsey read the application. She did not like what she saw. The safety data was thin. The animal studies did not address chronic use. There were anecdotal reports from Europe of nerve damage in adult patients. She did what a regulator is supposed to do. She asked for more information. Richardson Merrill responded by pressuring her. Phone calls, visits from executives, letters to her superiors accusing her of being stubborn, overly cautious, a woman out of her depth. Kelsey kept sending the application back. For 14 months, she refused to approve thalidomide for the American market. In November 1961, when the European Phocomelia story broke, the application was still sitting in Frances Kelsey's desk drawer, marked for further review. I have held the letters Richardson Merrill sent to the FDA. They are, without exception, letters of a company demanding that the regulators stop asking questions. Frances Kelsey, a woman whose name almost nobody in this country remembers, prevented a disaster that would have dwarfed everything you have heard so far. In 1962, President John Kennedy awarded her the Distinguished Federal Civilian Service Medal, the highest civilian honor available to a government employee. She stood on the lawn of the White House, a small woman with her hair pinned back, and shook the president's hand. The same year, Congress passed the Kefauver-Harris Amendment. For the first time in American history, pharmaceutical companies were required to prove that their drugs actually worked before selling them. Not just that they were safe, that they worked. The modern FDA was born out of the thalidomide scandal. Everything you think of as drug regulation in the United States, the clinical trials, the phased approvals, the post-market surveillance, all of it exists because Heinrich Muchter could not be bothered to test his sedative on a pregnant rabbit. Heinrich Muchter was never imprisoned. A criminal trial was opened in Germany in 1968. After more than 2 years of proceedings, the case collapsed. Grunenthal paid a settlement of 110 million Deutschmarks to the victims, which worked out to a few thousand per child. Muchter retired. He lived another 15 years. He died in 1987 in his home, a wealthy man surrounded by family. The compensation fund for thalidomide victims was not topped up by the German government until 2009. 48 years after the drug came off the shelves. And here is the final twist that I want you to hold in your head, because it comes back later in this video. Thalidomide is still manufactured today, the same molecule. It is used to treat leprosy in some countries and a form of bone marrow cancer in others. The black box warning on the package is as severe as any warning in modern medicine. Women of childbearing age are required to be on 2 separate forms of contraception before receiving a prescription. The drug is effective. The drug is useful. The drug was never the problem. The problem was a chemist who skipped a step, a company that buried the evidence, and a regulator in 46 countries who did not ask the question that Frances Kelsey asked on day 1. 1 product, 1 chemist, 10,000 babies. Nobody went to prison. Grace Fryer walked into the offices of United States Radium Corporation in Orange, New Jersey on a Monday morning in 1917. She was 17 years old. The pay was good, 8 cents a dial, which was almost 3 times what a typical factory girl could earn at the time. The job was delicate, precise, patriotic even, because the dials she was painting were for wristwatches and instrument panels going to American soldiers in France. The paint glowed in the dark. It was called Undark. The owner of the patent was a charming Austrian-born physician named Sabin von Sochocki, who had arrived in America a few years earlier with a degree from the University of Vienna and an idea that would make him rich. Sochocki had figured out how to suspend microscopic particles of radium in zinc sulfide, producing a luminous paint that glowed green in total darkness. Radium had been discovered by Marie Curie and her husband Pierre in 1898. By the early 1900s, it was considered a wonder substance. Health tonics contained radium. Face creams contained radium. Drinking water was sold with added radium in glass bottles. There were radium suppositories, radium chocolate, radium condoms. The public was told that this miraculous new element was the secret of life, the same force that powered the sun, and that put that same force into wristwatches that glowed in the pocket of a soldier in a trench in France. The women at United States Radium Corporation were given fine camel hair brushes and told to paint numbers onto the dial faces. The numbers were tiny. To get a sharp point on the brush, the supervisors taught them a technique called lip pointing. Dip the brush in the radium paint. Touch it to your lips to sharpen the tip. Paint the number, dip again, lip, paint. A woman could paint 250 dials in a good day. Most of them did it for years. They were told the paint was perfectly safe. Some of the girls painted their fingernails with it for fun, to make them glow at a Saturday night dance. Some painted their teeth. They went home with dust on their dresses and their hair, and in the dark, their entire bodies softly glowed. By 1922, the jaws began to rot. The first to die was a woman named Molly Maggia. She had been a dial painter for 4 years. Her teeth began falling out. Her dentist pulled one, and then another, and the sockets would not heal. The bone underneath was crumbling like wet chalk. When the dentist probed gently, entire sections of her jawbone came away in his hand. She developed abscesses that would not stop bleeding. She died on September 12, 1922, aged 24. The cause of death on her certificate was listed as syphilis. It was not syphilis. United States Radium Corporation had suggested the diagnosis to the doctor because a young woman dying of a shameful disease was a story that would end there. The same thing happened to Molly's sisters, Quinta and Albina. The same thing happened to Grace Fryer's friends. The company hired its own physicians to examine the dial painters and issue clean bills of health. Internally, United States Radium knew. A report commissioned in 1924 by Harvard physiologist Cecil Drinker found radium throughout the bodies of the workers. The company suppressed the report, forged a cleaned-up version, and sent the forgery to the state of New Jersey as proof that the workplace was safe. Grace Fryer was one of 5 women. The others were Catherine Schaub, Edna Hussman, and the Maggia sisters, Quinta and Albina, who decided to sue. Finding a lawyer took her 2 years. Every firm she approached told her the case was impossible. New Jersey law required that a lawsuit for occupational injury be filed within 2 years of exposure, and Grace had been exposed a decade earlier. Finally, a young attorney named Raymond Berry agreed to take the case in 1927. By the time the trial began in January 1928, the women were too weak to raise their arms to take the oath. Grace Fryer's jaw had been almost entirely removed. Her spine was collapsing. Doctors gave her a year to live. The case settled out of court on June 4, 1928. Each woman received $10,000, approximately $170,000 in today's money, plus $600 a year for life and all medical expenses. For most of them, life turned out to be short. Grace Fryer died in 1933. She was 34. The case that actually changed the law came later, in Illinois. A woman named Catherine Wolfe Donahue had painted dials at the Radium Dial Company in Ottawa. By 1938, she was bedridden, weighing 71 pounds, her hip disintegrating. She gave her testimony from a bed wheeled into the courtroom. She won. Radium Dial appealed 8 times and lost every time. Catherine died on July 27, 1938, 3 weeks after the final appeal was denied. Sabin von Soschaki, the inventor of the paint, the charming Austrian physician who had made United States Radium Corporation rich, he died in 1928 of aplastic anemia. His body was tested. Negative for tuberculosis, positive for radium. His own bones had been poisoned by his own invention. He was buried, as so many of his workers were buried, in a coffin that softly glowed in the dark. One product, one dentist's office full of crumbling jaws. Decades of lawsuits, and the man who invented it died from it before the first verdict was read. Lee Iacocca wanted a small car. More specifically, he wanted a small car that weighed less than 2,000 pounds and sold for less than $2,000. The target was called, inside Ford Motor Company, the 2000. Iacocca was the president of Ford. He was ambitious. He was in a hurry. The Japanese were eating Detroit's lunch in the economy segment, and Iacocca had decided that Ford would respond with a subcompact that could be designed, tooled, and on showroom floors in 25 months instead of the standard 43. The car would be called the Pinto. From an engineering standpoint, this was insane. 25 months is not enough time to do the crash testing that a new vehicle platform requires, but Iacocca had committed the number to the board, so the engineers at Ford's Dearborn headquarters in Michigan built the Pinto with the fuel tank mounted in the only place that fit, behind the rear axle, 6 inches from the rear bumper, separated from the passenger compartment by nothing but a thin sheet of stamped steel. In pre-production crash tests in 1970 and 1971, the Ford Pinto failed repeatedly. Rear-end collisions at 20 miles per hour would rupture the fuel tank. Bolts on the differential would puncture the tank from behind. A crumpled rear section would jam the doors shut, trapping occupants inside. Engineers proposed a series of fixes. A plastic shield over the differential bolts cost 7 cents per car. A polyethylene liner inside the tank cost $5. A complete repositioning of the tank above the axle cost $11. Ford chose none of them. The reason Ford chose none of them is now one of the most infamous documents in the history of American corporate malpractice. Inside Ford, an analysis was conducted. It is known to history as the Pinto Memo, though technically it was titled Fatalities Associated with Crash-Induced Fuel Leakage and Fires. The memo did a cost-benefit calculation. It multiplied the projected number of burn deaths, 180 per year, by the settlement value Ford expected to pay per death, which was $200,000. It added projected burn injuries at $67,000 per case and damaged vehicles at $700 each. The total cost of doing nothing came to $49 million per year. The total cost of fixing all Pintos sold came to $137 million per year. $49 million is less than $137 million. Ford did the math. Ford did not fix the car. The Pinto went on sale in September 1970 for $1,999. Over the next 8 years, Ford sold roughly 2 million of them, and they began to burn. The specific cases are on the public record. In May 1972, a woman named Lily Gray and a 13-year-old boy named Richard Grimshaw were in a 1972 Pinto on a freeway in Southern California. Another vehicle struck the Pinto at approximately 30 miles per hour from behind. The tank ruptured. The car exploded. Lily Gray was killed. Richard Grimshaw survived with burns over 90% of his body. He underwent more than 60 surgeries over the remaining decades of his life. A California jury in 1978 awarded Grimshaw $125 million in punitive damages against Ford. The judge reduced it to $3.5 million. it was still the largest punitive award against an automaker in American history at the time. In August 1978, 3 teenage girls from Elkhart, Indiana, Judy Ulrich, her sister Lynn, and their cousin Donna, were driving a 1973 Pinto when a van rear-ended them at highway speed. The Pinto exploded. All 3 girls burned to death. The state of Indiana filed criminal charges against Ford Motor Company, reckless homicide. It was the first time in American history that a corporation had been charged with murder. Ford was acquitted in March 1980 after a bruising 6-month trial, but the message was sent. A corporation was no longer untouchable. In the middle of it, in September 1977, the magazine Mother Jones published an exposé titled Pinto Madness by the journalist Mark Dowie. Dowie had obtained the internal memo. He printed the numbers. He printed the calculation. He printed the fact that Ford executives had known the car would kill people and had chosen, with a pocket calculator, to let it kill them because the math worked out. The public reaction was a firestorm. In June 1978, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration forced Ford to recall 1.5 million Pintos. The fix installed a plastic shield over the differential bolts and a longer filler neck to prevent fuel spillage. It cost Ford $20 million. It was, almost exactly, the $11 fix they had declined to do 8 years earlier, multiplied by the number of cars they had by then already sold. The documented death toll from Pinto fires is at least 27. Industry estimates run as high as 500 to 900, accounting for cases where fire was listed as the cause of death, but the specific defect was never attributed. Lee Iacocca was fired from Ford in July 1978, not over the Pinto, but over a personal conflict with Henry Ford II. He walked directly across town and was hired as the CEO of Chrysler, where he saved the company from bankruptcy and became a celebrated American business hero. He wrote 2 best-selling memoirs. He was floated as a potential presidential candidate in the late 1980s. He died in July 2019, aged 94, at his home in Bel Air, California. 1 product, 1 memo, 27 confirmed deaths. The man who built it wrote a bestseller and died in a mansion. Paul Hermann Müller worked for the Geigy Company in Basel, Switzerland. In September 1939, the same week Germany invaded Poland, Müller synthesized a compound that had been sitting in chemistry textbooks since 1874. It had never been used for anything. Müller had been looking for a contact insecticide. He tested the compound on a glass plate lined with flies. The flies died. He tested it on moths, beetles, mosquitoes, lice. They all died. Müller had discovered that dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane, DDT, was lethal to almost every insect at almost any dose and appeared to be harmless to mammals. In 1948, Paul Hermann Müller was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. The citation praised DDT as a chemical that had saved more human lives than any other substance in history. This was not hyperbole. During the Second World War, DDT had been dusted on Allied troops to kill body lice carrying typhus. It had been sprayed across the Pacific Theater to control malaria-carrying mosquitoes. In Naples in 1943, DDT stopped a typhus epidemic that would have killed tens of thousands. After the war, the World Health Organization sprayed DDT across the malarial belts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas, and the death toll from malaria dropped from millions per year to hundreds of thousands. Then DDT came to suburbia. In the 1950s, American cities and counties began fogging residential neighborhoods with DDT. Trucks rolled down streets in New Jersey and Michigan and Long Island, spraying a white mist that children ran through as a kind of game. Summer camps dusted DDT on children's heads to kill lice. It was sprayed in grocery stores, in school cafeterias, in hospital maternity wards. The chemical industry promoted it as a miracle of modern life. Time magazine ran advertisements showing a singing chorus of vegetables and a housewife praising __, quote, _for__. Between 1945 and 1972, approximately 1 1/3 billion pounds of DDT were sprayed across the continental United States. That is 4 pounds of DDT per American, infants included, distributed across the soil, the water, the grass, the food supply, and the air. In 1958, a reader wrote a letter to her friend Rachel Carson in Maine. Olga Owens Huckins kept a private bird sanctuary. That summer, a DDT truck had sprayed her property against Huckins's protests. Within days, the songbirds in her sanctuary were dying in convulsions on her lawn, their beaks open, their feathers frozen in strange, rigid postures. She wrote to Carson and asked if Carson, who was a marine biologist and a writer, could use her influence to stop it. Rachel Carson spent the next 4 years writing Silent Spring. She was in poor health. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer in 1960, though she kept this quiet, and she worked from a house overlooking the Sheepscot River in Maine, surrounded by biologists and ornithologists and government scientists who were feeding her data that the industry did not want released. She wrote about the bald eagle, whose eggshells were growing so thin that the mothers were crushing their own chicks when they sat to incubate. She wrote about the robins of Michigan State University campus, where the elm trees had been sprayed with DDT and the robins had died by the hundred, convulsing in the grass. She wrote about the cancer clusters in farm communities where the chemical had been sprayed on cotton and tobacco for a generation. Silent Spring was published in September 1962. The chemical industry launched the largest coordinated attack on a single author in American publishing history. Monsanto printed a parody essay called The Desolate Year, imagining a world destroyed by insect plagues because Carson had taken away its pesticides. Velsicol Chemical threatened to sue her publisher. A former United States Secretary of Agriculture, Ezra Taft Benson, wrote privately to President Eisenhower asking why a spinster with no children was so concerned about genetics, and suggesting she was probably a communist. The industry hired doctors to write op-eds calling her hysterical. The president of Monsanto personally denounced her as a fanatic. Rachel Carson testified before the United States Senate on June 4, 1963. She was dying. Her cancer had metastasized to her spine. She had lost her hair to radiation therapy and was wearing a wig. She sat at the witness table and recommended, calmly, that the United States government establish a federal agency to regulate pesticides. She recommended long-term toxicological testing. She recommended monitoring of wildlife. She did not call for the banning of DDT. She called for caution and for science. She died on April 14, 1964, at her home in Silver Spring, Maryland. She was 56 years old. Her tumor, according to the oncological research done in the decades since, was almost certainly driven by the same class of organochlorine compounds that she had spent her final years warning the world about. The industry that called her hysterical had, in effect, helped to kill her. On June 14, 1972, William Ruckelshaus, the first administrator of the newly created Environmental Protection Agency, signed the order banning DDT for agricultural use in the United States. The agency itself had only existed for 18 months. It had been created, in large part, in response to Silent Spring. The ban came 8 years after Carson's death. Paul Hermann Müller, the Swiss chemist, lived until 1965. He died peacefully in Basel, his Nobel Prize still in its case, his reputation intact. The bald eagle population, which had collapsed to fewer than 500 nesting pairs in the lower 48 states by 1963, began to recover after the DDT ban. By 2007, the bald eagle was removed from the endangered species list. One product, one Nobel Prize, one woman who was called hysterical and then proven right from a grave she went to early. The chemical is still detectable in the fat tissue of nearly every American alive today. The first memo is dated 1934. Let me be specific. The memo was written by a physician named Anthony Lanza, who worked as a medical consultant for the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. Metropolitan Life insured the workers at the Johns Manville Corporation, the largest asbestos manufacturer in the world, headquartered in Manville, New Jersey. Lanza had been asked to look at chest x-rays from Manville factory workers. He found widespread asbestosis, a permanent, progressive scarring of the lungs caused by inhaling asbestos fibers. He reported his findings to Johns Manville and to the company's executives. The executives filed the report. They did not share it with the workers. In 1935, the editor of Asbestos magazine, the trade publication for the asbestos industry, wrote a letter to Sumner Simpson, the president of Asbestos Manhattan, asking whether the magazine should publish information about the health risks of asbestos dust. Simpson wrote back. His reply is preserved. He said, "The less said about asbestos, the better off we are." He recommended that the magazine publish nothing. Asbestos, as a material, had been used in small quantities since antiquity. The ancient Greeks wove it into funeral shrouds because the bodies could be cremated without the shroud burning. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder noted in the 1st century that slaves who worked the asbestos mines tended to die of a sickness of the lungs. He recommended that the slaves wear bladders over their faces to filter the dust. This advice was written in Latin in the year 77 AD. It would have been useful to the 20th century. Industrial asbestos use exploded after the invention of the steam engine in the late 1800s. Asbestos is a remarkable material. It is a naturally occurring silicate mineral that can be spun into fibers and woven into cloth. It does not burn. It does not conduct heat or electricity. It is chemically inert. It insulates steam pipes, lines brake pads, reinforces cement, proofs roofing tiles, and fireproofs theater curtains. In 1920, the global asbestos industry produced about 200,000 tons per year. By 1975, it produced 5 million tons per year. There was no modern city on Earth in which asbestos had not been woven into the walls, the ceilings, the pipes, the ovens, the ships, the schools, the hospitals, and the floors. And in every one of those places, microscopic fibers were coming loose, floating in the air, and settling in human lungs. In 1960, a South African pathologist named Christopher Wagner published a paper that connected asbestos exposure to a previously rare and almost invariably fatal cancer called mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is a cancer of the pleural lining around the lungs. It is caused almost exclusively by inhaled asbestos. It has a latency period of 20 to 50 years. A person exposed in their 20s as a shipyard worker would not develop symptoms until their 50s. By the time they developed symptoms, they were, almost without exception, already dead. In 1964, Dr. Irving Selikoff of the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York published a landmark study of asbestos insulation workers. He had followed 632 workers from a single local union. Of those 632 men, the rate of lung cancer was 7 times the national average. The rate of mesothelioma was hundreds of times higher than the general population. Selikoff's conclusion was unambiguous. Asbestos, at occupational exposure levels, was killing American workers in a predictable, measurable, industrial-scale pattern. The response of the asbestos industry was to organize a defense. Johns Manville and Asbestos and Owens Corning and a consortium of other manufacturers funded research studies designed to muddy the findings. They hired epidemiologists to argue that smoking was the real cause of lung cancer in asbestos workers. They ran advertisements. They filed legal motions. They settled cases with confidentiality agreements. They kept selling asbestos. In 1977, a trial attorney in South Carolina named Ron Motley obtained, through discovery, a file of internal correspondence from Asbestos Manhattan. These became known as the Sumner-Simpson Papers. They documented, over a period of 40 years, the industry's internal knowledge of asbestos disease and its deliberate suppression of that knowledge from workers, doctors, and regulators. The papers were damning. They were specific. They named names. Johns Manville Corporation, faced with more than 16,000 personal injury lawsuits, filed for bankruptcy on August 26, 1982. It was the largest company in American history to that point to file for bankruptcy, not because it was unprofitable, but because the projected future liabilities from asbestos disease were greater than the total value of the company. The bankruptcy was specifically designed to cap liability to workers and their families, who would now have to apply to a trust fund that paid pennies on the dollar of their medical costs. In 1989, the United States Environmental Protection Agency issued a rule banning most uses of asbestos. The asbestos industry is the country. The first internal memo warning of asbestos disease was dated 1934. The full ban came in 2024. That is 90 years of paperwork. During those 90 years, the conservative estimate for global deaths from asbestos-related disease is 250,000 per year at the peak, and more than 200,000 cumulative deaths in the United States alone. The World Health Organization estimates that approximately 125 million people worldwide remain occupationally exposed to asbestos as of the most recent counts. Anthony Lanza, the physician who wrote the 1934 memo, continued to work as a medical consultant for the insurance and mining industries until his retirement. He died in 1964 at his home in New York. Sumner Simpson, who wrote "The Less Said About Asbestos, the Better Off We Are," died in 1955. Both men died in bed. One product, 90 years of memos. Full ban signed in 2024 by a pen that the men who wrote those memos never lived to see. Edward Skolnick was a brilliant man. I want to give him that. He had a medical degree from Harvard. He had done foundational research on cancer-causing viruses at the National Institutes of Health. In 1985, he was hired by Merck & Company, the pharmaceutical giant headquartered in White House Station, New Jersey, to run their research laboratories. By 1993, he was the president of Merck Research Laboratories. By the late 1990s, he was one of the most powerful research executives in the American pharmaceutical industry, and he had bet his company's future on a drug called rofecoxib. Rofecoxib would be sold under the brand name Vioxx. It was a new class of painkiller called a COX-2 inhibitor. The pitch to patients was specific and seductive. Traditional anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen and naproxen worked well for arthritis pain, but they damaged the stomach lining and caused ulcers and gastrointestinal bleeding in long-term users. Vioxx was designed to block only the COX-2 enzyme, which caused inflammation, while leaving the COX-1 enzyme, which protected the stomach, untouched. In theory, it would give arthritis patients pain relief without the bleeding. The Food and Drug Administration approved Vioxx on May 20, 1999. Merck's marketing budget for the launch was $500 million, the largest pharmaceutical launch in American history to that point. Television commercials featured Dorothy Hamill, the Olympic figure skater, gliding on the ice. Print advertisements filled every magazine in every doctor's waiting room in the country. By 2003, Vioxx was generating $2.5 billion a year in revenue for Merck. Approximately 80 million people worldwide were prescribed it at some point during its 5 years on the market. Now I want to show you the memo. In March 2000, Merck published the results of a clinical trial called VIGOR, the Vioxx Gastrointestinal Outcomes Research Trial. It was a large study, 8,000 patients. The trial was designed to prove that Vioxx caused fewer stomach ulcers than naproxen, the generic anti-inflammatory it was supposed to replace. The trial did prove that. It also, incidentally, showed something else. Patients taking Vioxx had approximately 5 times the rate of heart attacks as patients taking naproxen. Not a small increase, a 5-fold increase. In the trial population, there were 20 heart attacks in the Vioxx group and 4 in the naproxen group. Merck explained it away. The company's official interpretation was that naproxen was cardioprotective, that it was reducing heart attacks rather than Vioxx causing them. There was no evidence for this interpretation. It was a hypothesis invented to explain a result that Merck did not want to publish. The Viger paper, when it was finally submitted to the New England Journal of Medicine in November 2000, omitted 3 of the heart attacks that had occurred in the Vioxx group. The omission was not discovered for years. And in the internal files of Merck Research Laboratories, there is a memo. It is dated March 9, 2000. It is signed by Edward Skolnick. Skolnick, reviewing the same Viger data, wrote to his colleagues that the cardiovascular signal was real. He wrote that it is a shame, but it is a low incidence and it is mechanism-based as we worried it was. He wrote about his concern that the drug's cardiovascular risk was, in his words, quote, 12, meaning built into the pharmacology of the drug itself, not a random statistical fluke. He wrote that quote, _13 I have this memo. Blackwell has held it. It is 7 sentences long. It is the single most damning internal document in the history of the modern American pharmaceutical industry. It was written by the chief of research at Merck in the same month that Merck was submitting the Vigor results to the world with the opposite interpretation. For 4 more years, Vioxx stayed on the market. Merck spent another $100 million a year marketing it. Merck launched follow-up trials. Merck attacked academic researchers who suggested the cardiovascular signal was real. A Cleveland Clinic cardiologist named Eric Topol published a meta-analysis in August 2001 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, arguing that Vioxx was causing heart attacks. Merck phoned the dean of Topol's medical school. Topol was eventually pushed out of his administrative position. Inside the FDA, a career drug safety reviewer named David Graham was running his own analysis. Graham had been with the agency for 20 years. He ran data on a Kaiser Permanente population of more than 1 million patients. His conclusion, arrived at in early 2004, was that Vioxx had caused between 88,000 and 139,000 excess heart attacks in the American population since its approval in 1999. Approximately 30 to 40% of those heart attacks were fatal. Graham's superiors at the FDA pressured him to soften his conclusions. He refused. They pressured him to delay publication. He refused. On September 30, 2004, Merck voluntarily withdrew Vioxx from the market. The withdrawal was announced at a press conference. Merck's stock dropped 27% in a single trading day, wiping out approximately $27 billion in market capitalization. The company's CEO, Raymond Gilmartin, said that the decision had been made that morning on the basis of new data. This was not true. The data had been there for 4 years. In November 2004, David Graham testified before the United States Senate Finance Committee. He sat at the witness table and said, on the record, that Vioxx was the largest drug safety catastrophe in the history of this country or the history of the world. He estimated the death toll at between 55,000 and 65,000 Americans. He named his own agency as having failed the public. The most viewed clip of his testimony is the moment a senator asks him what other drugs he is currently worried about, and Graham answers, clearly, with a list of 5 names. The civil litigation followed. Merck faced more than 27,000 individual lawsuits. In 2007, the company agreed to a single global settlement of $4.85 billion to resolve most of the claims. It was the largest civil settlement in the history of American pharmaceutical litigation. The average payout per family was approximately $150,000, less than the annual salary of a single middle manager at Merck. No criminal charges were filed against any Merck executive. Edward Skolnick had retired from Merck in 2002, 2 years before the withdrawal, with his full pension intact. He moved on to run research at the Broad Institute, a genomics research center affiliated with MIT and Harvard, where he continued to be celebrated as a statesman of American biomedicine. Raymond Gilmartin stepped down as CEO in May 2005 and took a teaching position at Harvard Business School. Neither man ever faced personal financial consequences. Neither man ever spent a night in jail, neither man ever publicly apologized to the families of the 60,000 dead. The memo, dated March 9, 2000, it says the risk is real. It says it is mechanism-based. The drug stayed on shelves until September 2004. One product, 60,000 dead. A 7-sentence memo. The man who signed it retired with a pension. 6 products, 6 approvals by experts, 6 graveyards. Thalidomide, 10,000 babies, and the chemist died wealthy in his own bed. Radium, and the inventor's bones glowed through his coffin, but his lawyers still fought the survivors. The Pinto, and the man who built it became a national hero and died at 94 in a mansion. DDT, and the woman who warned us died first, at 56, of the cancer she described. Asbestos, and the memo dates to 1934, while the ban dates to 2024. Vioxx, and the memo is 7 sentences long, and the pension is intact. I have laid out these 6 cases tonight because I want you to understand the pattern. The pattern is not a mystery. In every single case, there was a moment, a clinical trial, a factory x-ray, a dented fuel tank, a dying bird on a lawn, a Harvard physiologist's suppressed report, a 7-sentence memo from a research chief, where somebody in a position of authority knew, in specific detail, that the product would kill people. And in every single case, that person calculated that the cost of admitting it was higher than the cost of letting the dying continue. And in every single case, the math worked out in favor of the company, because the people doing the dying did not appear as a line item on the balance sheet. The modern world runs on this calculation. It runs on it every day. The products on your shelf right now, the ones in your medicine cabinet, the ones under your sink, the ones plugged into your wall, the ones your children are eating. Some small number of them are sitting in this exact position. The trial has been run, the memo has been written, the cost-benefit analysis has been done, and somebody in a corner office has decided that the complaints will not reach a critical mass for another 3 years, another 5, another 10. You will not know which product it is. You will not know until the recall notice goes out, and by then, whatever harm was going to be done has already been done to somebody's daughter, somebody's grandfather, somebody's unborn child. The 7th product is already on your shelf. I am Blackwell, and next time, I will tell you about the species that vanished while the reports sat in drawers, and about the men who were paid handsomely to make sure nobody read them. Until then, check the labels, read the fine print, and if something seems too miraculous, too cheap, too universally beloved, ask yourself a single question. Who signed the memo, and where are they living now?